Yes, my name is Nora Kennedy, and I'm the Sherman Fairchild Conservator in charge, but I am in charge of the Photograph Conservation Department, which may seem a little odd since this is a paintings conservation panel, but I'll explain my official capacity here in a moment. In the meantime, I do want to introduce my colleagues here on the stage. I'll start on my right here, Ellen Nigro, who is Assistant Paintings Conservator at the Brooklyn Museum. Janice Staggs, who, I have to read your title, is Director of Curatorial and Manager of Publications at the Neue Galerie here in New York City, and also Sean Digny-Pier, actually my colleague, at the Metropolitan Museum, a conservator in the Paintings Conservation Department. It's lovely that you've all taken a break from seeing all of those wonderful objects. Oh my gosh. But it's good, sit down, relax. I think you're really going to enjoy the presentation that we've gathered here for you. I'll just let you know that we're so grateful for this TEFAF Restoration Fund. It's so important. It is done in collaboration with ICOM-CC, and I'm here officially as a vice chair of the board of ICOM-CC, which is the International Council of Museums Conservation Committee. And just a little plug on that. Basically, ICOM-CC, one of our major goals is to promote and advocate for conservation of cultural heritage. So you can see why this partnership is absolutely perfect. We are the largest of ICOM's international committees, and ICOM does have 32 committees. The conservation group is about 2,600 conservators, scientists, educators from around the globe. That's one of the joys of being a member of ICOM, is that you get to meet colleagues from every corner of the world. We have a very active publications online program. All of our members produce scholarship that we want to make readily available to everyone, so do visit our website. And in case any of you want to know more, we're having our triennial conference in Valencia coming up in September, so there's still time to register. And I know our colleagues in Valencia are preparing a really wonderful meeting. But now let's get back to the topic at hand, which is paintings conservation. And again, this celebration really of, I'll pass this along to you, of this wonderful award to the Neue Galerie for this really phenomenal painting by Egon Schiele that we're about to hear more. So, Janice, I'd like to turn to you.
Sure, of course.
First of all, could you tell us a little bit more about your institution?
Sure,
about the Neue Galerie?
Absolutely. But before I talk about the Neue Galerie, for anyone who might not know, I also want to offer some thanks, as this is the right occasion, I think, to really extend some gratitude to a number of people who brought the Neue Galerie and our Egon Schiele painting here today. So first and foremost, a big gesture of appreciation to everyone involved with the TEFAF Museum Restoration Fund grant. And Rachel, I really enjoyed hearing your remarks about the history of the program, and we're so delighted and honored that the Neue Galerie has part of it as the 23rd recipient. And a special expression of gratitude to Coco and Simone, who really helped shepherd us through this process of being here today. Also, of course, I have to acknowledge the ongoing and dedicated efforts of Sean Digny-Pier and all of the colleagues at the Metropolitan Museum of Art who are overseeing the conservation of our beautiful painting. Our museum is so small, we don't have our own conservation department, so this project wouldn't be possible without the museum generously making you and your staff and your efforts available. And then, because you talked about really the international scope of ICOM and really of TEFAF, I think it's also nice to acknowledge people who can't be with us here today. We have some international colleagues, really all based in Austria, who have been extremely generous behind the scenes with their time, with their expertise. And I know I have learned so much working with them, and hopefully you are too. So I'll just do a shout out to Kirsten Jesse and Sandra Gieselek from the Leopold Museum, Stephanie Jahn from the Belvedere, Karen Meyerhofer from the Wien Museum, and also Paul Bernhard Eiper of the Museum Joanneum in Graz. They were all very generous in sharing research findings, proposing ideas, and I know we'll continue to learn a lot as we continue this journey together. So with that, yes, I'd like to just say a little bit about the Neue Galerie for anyone who doesn't know our museum. We are a museum of Austrian and German art located on 86th Street and 5th Avenue. So we're part of Museum Mile, just shortly above the Met and below the Guggenheim in that very illustrious location. We're in a distinguished landmark Gilded Age building designed by the architects Carrere and Hastings. We're very delighted to say that we are celebrating, just actually have celebrated our 20th anniversary. So it's a very opportune moment for us to really acknowledge, I think, all that we've been able to bring to the city and to people interested in Germanic art of this period. We've held a number of inaugural solo exhibitions in the United States for Austrian artists affiliated with the Vienna Secession, the Wiener Werkstätte, as well as German artists that were part of the Brücke, the Blaue Reiter, as well as the Neue Sachlichkeit movement, or New Objectivity movement, as we like to say in English, but also the Bauhaus. And we just closed a really stunning, well-received exhibition on our president, Ronald S. Lauder, his private collection. I mean, really a big gesture of gratitude to him as well. We would not have the Neue Galerie New York except for his vision, as well as that of Viennese-born Serge Sabarsky, who was an important collector, exhibition organizer, as well as gallerist, who unfortunately died before the museum opened, but Mr. Lauder decided to realize their dream as a tribute to his friend, and that's why our cafe is called Cafe Sabarsky. So, and then just to sort of say something about what's to come. I have some interior views of our Austrian decorative arts galleries, and you can see the town Among Greenery, where it's often displayed at the Neue Galerie. We're looking forward this autumn to having a special show on the early work of Max Beckmann, opening in October, the formative years, as we're calling it, 1915 to 1925, curated for us by Dr. Olaf Peters, and I hope all of you will come and tell your friends to join us.
Thank you. No, that was wonderful. And it's really nice to see the painting, you know, as it's been installed. I wonder if you could tell us when the painting arrived and also something about the provenance. Where has it been over its lifetime?
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's really a wonderful circumstance of serendipity how we came to have this painting, and I think also speaks so much to the generosity of art lovers that are here in New York, and also that really, I think, love this art as much as we do and as much as our two co-founders do. So in 2005, we hosted a solo retrospective for Egon Schiele's career. It filled both floors of the museum. It was drawn exclusively from the collections of Serge Sabarsky, Ronald Lauder, as well as the museum's holdings. The show was so popular that we actually had lines around the block in the closing days. We extended our hours, I believe, until midnight, if I'm remembering correctly. And it really drew a lot of attention. It had been a long time since there was a major exhibition at a museum scale for Egon Schiele's work. And it was around this time that a family located in Westchester that had been collectors of Egon Schiele's work, but unknown to us, or at least unknown to myself, were dealing with managing the estate. Their mother, Marguerite Manley, had passed away. Her husband, Otto Manley, had predeceased her, and they had a number of artworks in the family's collection that they wanted to find proper museum homes in New York City that they thought could be the best stewards for those objects. And we were very fortunate that we were told they considered 3 different museums in New York. Not sure who the other 2 were, but we were really delighted when they reached out to us and said that they wanted to offer this extraordinary painting to us as a bequest from the estate of Margaret and Otto Manley, and we were, of course, thrilled. I think my colleague, Scott Gutterman, mentioned during the reception upstairs that they actually even hand-delivered it to us in their car. So it was really very charming, and I think a really beautiful friendship has sprung up between us and the colleagues in the intervening years. And we really treasure this picture. It's one of the most beloved works in the museum's collection and has remained on almost constant display. We did, speaking of Maastricht, lend it once to the Van Gogh Museum as part of a very important collaboration that we did together, but otherwise we have always had this on view. So to speak just briefly about the provenance, I think another thing that's really extraordinary about this picture is how well documented the ownership history is. And we know that provenance is such a key buzzword these days, and it's something that all museums take extremely seriously. And we're thrilled that this one is so very clear. So for the first years of its ownership, it was basically with 3 prominent Viennese dealers. We see Guido Arnaud as well as Neue Galerie, and then later the Galerie Wirtel. It was only with one private individual, Johannes Graf zu Löwenstein, before the Manley family came to have it, and at that time their last name was Mandel. So I just have a few illustrative things to sort of show so you can understand what goes behind being a provenance researcher, because that's one of the hats that a few of us wear at the Neue Galerie. So during Egon Schiele's lifetime, he actually sent it to an exhibition in Stockholm in 1917. I wonder if the paint was even dry, because this opened in early September, and we know that he had been to the town where he painted it in June of that year. It was part of an entire room dedicated to his work with 15 other pictures, most of which were landscapes, and you can see it there on the left. And Sean and I are quite intrigued by the fact that it's in a different frame than we have it in today. So that's one little tidbit. Looking at the verso of the painting, we're delighted to find that it does have this Galerie Arnaud sticker on the back that confirms the address of the gallery in Vienna. And it was published in 1919 in Deutsche Kunst und Dekoration, noting that the person who provided the photograph and the owner was Galerie Arnaud. So that's very nice further documentation. And I can also say there's an Austrian art publication in 1925 with the same picture that also says Galerie Arnaud, so we know it remained with him at least until 1925. By 1928, it's in the hands of Otto Nierenstein, later Otto Kallier, and probably all of you in this room know his name because of Galerie Saint-Étienne, but he started off with the Neue Galerie in Vienna, which is kind of an homage to where we take our name from. He had established that gallery in 1923, and in 1928 jointly did an exhibition with the Hagenbund that was a solo show commemorating 10 years since Egon Schiele's death in 1918 of the flu epidemic. And then just a couple of other things. The Manley family was very generous and actually gave us their original invoice for when they purchased the picture, so I think that's really incredibly special. It's signed by Leo Bondi, who at the time was the director of the Galerie Wirtel. I think it's very interesting to see that it says that he paid 4,000 Austrian shillings. I was telling Sean, I looked this up, it's evidently about $750 US at the time. So it's incredible how the market has evolved in the intervening years. But just to sort of also kind of bring this back to, a social and historical reality of that period, shortly after he acquires this picture, May 1936, he and Marguerite marry in 1937. Although he was raised Catholic, his family was of a Jewish background, and they recognized the threat that Hitler represented. So they left Vienna, 37 or 38, and they ultimately found their way to the New York City area by 1941. Unfortunately, they were not able to bring their collection with them, and we know from some of the other documentation that the family has shared that there was an ongoing correspondence involving lawyers and other government officials to try to reclaim portions of their collection. And an agreement was reached in 1948 that if Otto Mandel, now Manley, would lend this Schiele picture as well as others to the Venice Biennale in 1948, and we see it in the catalog there, number 19, as well as the sticker on the back, that the Austrian Bundesdenkmalamt, or federal kind of monuments office, they oversee cultural property, then he would be allowed to have the picture exported. And we have the stamp on the back, which Sean nicely found, that shows that that export permission was actually granted. And we also have paperwork that I did not include because it's like a photocopy of a photocopy, so you can't really read it. But it says that the export permission was granted. And they also had to pay like a big tax or tariff to be able to export it. So
wow.
In a nutshell, that's the ownership history as we understand it to date.
Yeah. No, and it's fantastic that it's all so well documented. But I think also it's really touching that, you have that connection with the family now. They know that it's in a good place, and you know them. That's really beautiful. That adds to it. Could you tell us a bit more about the painting in terms of its history in Egon Schiele's oeuvre?
Sure. So I think most people think of Egon Schiele as a figurative painter. His provocative erotic works, I think, are extremely well known. His prison episode in 1912 has certainly been dramatized, I think, on numerous occasions. But he was also a very gifted landscape artist and incredibly fascinated by this genre. Even as a very young artist, well, he was in art school, and even before art school, we know he spent time in the countryside doing townscapes, cityscapes. And I'll just briefly show a few works that we regularly display at the Neue Galerie, as these will be familiar to you. But for anyone who's gone to the Leopold or the Belvedere, they certainly have a wide array of landscapes by the artist that you can see. So on the left is The City on the Blue River, or The Dead City 1 from 1910. It's actually the first in his so-called Dead City series. So I think what's fascinating about this as an art historian is that he's already imbuing landscape with this sort of anthropomorphic qualities and also tying landscape to man's fate. Basically, in this sense, we're seeing that the city is this inhospitable place. We're not seeing people alive. We're not seeing anything alive. In fact, you can't even have any activity because of this tightly cropped bird's eye view. All we see are these medieval buildings tightly massed together. On the right is one that I think is very much in that sense of conveying almost the existential qualities of being a human and the dark side, I think, that we can all experience about sensing mortality, this kind of spindly, barren tree in this barren landscape. This was painted the year of his prison episode, so perhaps it does reflect some of the trauma that he felt being imprisoned for artwork that was deemed indecent. And the shock that that represented for him. And then, yes, on the left is this really beautiful picture, speaking of donations, that was given to the Neue Galerie as part of the bequest of the Estee Lauder Family Trust. We are so thrilled to be able to show this. This is one of his first larger landscape pictures that was done on canvas from 1913. And again, we know he was in Stein on the Danube early in the spring. The picture was exhibited later that summer. It was immediately received rapturously, described as magnificent, and already representative of like an old-fashioned style of landscape that Schiele was kind of bringing to the world. And then, of course, we have our special picture, the 1917 town among the greenery. You can already see a dramatic change in his approach. The brushwork, which Sean will talk about, shows a lot of verve and impasto. The colors are dramatically different, far more vibrant and lively. There actually are figures included in this picture, which you almost never see, almost in this very joyous way, which I would say as an art historian is something of a surprise in that we know he served in the war. This is toward the end of the war, but of course he didn't know it at the time he painted this picture. But we also know that there was some good news. He and his wife were expecting their first child. He also was able to change his assignment, was able to work closer to Vienna, and I think perhaps felt more optimistic about the future. And as I already mentioned, he also knew he was going to be sending works to this delegation in Stockholm, which was the largest presentation of Austrian modern art outside in Scandinavia, and in tandem with an international peace conference. So I think people felt hopeful that there were brighter days ahead.
I mean, honestly, having had the good fortune to have seen the painting a couple of days ago with Sean, yeah, it really is a joyous painting. It's lovely. So we're going to switch gears a little bit now and hear a bit more about the technical, which of course is absolutely critical to the aesthetic. So Sean, are there some things that you can share with us about the artist's technique?
Yes, most definitely. I put together some images to share with you to familiarize you all with the painting and really walk you through how it was created. Okay, so this is the painting as we received it at the Met, framed, obviously, and at the image at the right is obviously the back of it with a backboard. And this is unframed. It's painted in oil on canvas that stretched on what we believe is its original wood stretcher, and you can see that here. Here on the left, we're looking at a detail of the tacking edge, and what is significant here is that the ground, you can see it extends beyond the picture plane and it rounds onto the tacking edge. So what this tells us is the fabric that he used was prepared before he actually stretched it on this stretcher. So it would have been prepared on a larger piece of fabric that would have been cut out, and then that material would have been stretched onto this stretcher. Either he prepared the canvas himself, which he was known to have done regularly, or he purchased it pre-prepared from a manufacturer and then used that material. And in the course of our work, we intend to examine that in the context of trying to figure out if it was Schiele who prepared it or a manufacturer who prepared it. In the detail on the right, it's a really magnified detail of the ground that we're seeing in the detail at the left. And what is really interesting about this ground is that it's whisper thin. There's so little material here, and so in the arrow that's at the bottom of that image is pointing to an area in the interstices of the fabric where the ground has accumulated. And the arrow at the top is pointing to an area of the fabric at the crest of the weave. And at the crest of the weave, you imagine that's where, when the ground was applied, it was kind of sloughed off as it was being applied at the same time. And you actually see the canvas fibers there. That's not abrasion caused by age or treatment. It is like it would have been. There's very little ground here, which makes it a very, the canvas itself is in very good condition. So overall, it's a very flexible canvas, which is wonderful. But this is to show that it's a very thin ground. This is the same detail on the left to show another, something else we're noticing here. And if you can see the brown layer that I'm highlighting there, that is we can't see it through the paint, but it's along every turnover edge. So it's likely it was applied either wholly over the canvas or in isolated areas, and it extends around onto the tacking edge. Either it is brown because it was pigmented. It could have been a toning layer that he applied to actually tone the ground intentionally as part of his technique, or it was a transparent layer that he would have put on to seal the ground in preparation for the paint that he was to apply later on. That's something else we'll be exploring. We'll certainly be able to identify if it is pigmented and it was an intentional color, or as an artifact as time passed and it aged and discolored over time. From there, these two arrows are highlighting underdrawing. So he made a whole drawing of this composition on the ground, really very well planned. And throughout the painting, you see it peeking through these little reserves that he left in the paint. So we're seeing the white area there in the middle is the actual ground of the canvas, and then those darker lines there are the drawing, and that would have been done in a carbon-containing medium, like a hard drawing material, like a pencil or charcoal, or graphite, that kind of thing. And from there, he then reinforced those lines with a blue linear underpainting. So these are where the blue lines start to come in that Janice mentioned. And there, I'm highlighting that right there. Okay, and this is just a step back a bit, and you can see the blue linear paint that he added throughout and how it really anchors the composition. That was really the first bit of paint that he put on the painting, and as the painting developed, he reinforced it and edited it along the way. But it really serves as the crutch of the painting. It anchors the whole thing. From there, he applied his paint film in both thin and thick applications. The bit at the top that I'm showing you is first of all, this is an image taken in raking light. So it's the painting is lit from one direction to show the texture. So it looks really dramatic here, but that's intentional so you can actually see the texture. If you were to look at this in ambient light, it wouldn't be as exaggerated. But the thin layer there that we see, and then the bit of texture at the bottom. Okay. This is a series of slides. It's the same detail, just stepped out a bit from as the one that I showed you a moment ago. The image at the left is an ordinary light photograph, just ambient light. The image in the middle is, again, breaking light. And the image at the right is transmitted light. And this series of images is really about the transmitted light image. And transmitted light is when you're looking at the front of something and you are illuminating it from behind. So we're looking at light passing through the painting. What you see along the left-hand side of the detail and running horizontally through the middle where it's darker, that's actually the stretcher, which is blocking the light, so that's why it's darker there. And in fact, most other paintings where there's more paint, the whole painting might look like the darker areas in transmitted light, or just a little bit of light coming through. But the whole paint film is whisper thin, other than the little flecks of impasto that he added. Again, just showing you that this is a really delicate object in itself. It's very precious in that way, and it's a remarkable thing that it made it to us in such a brilliant condition. Here's another detail. In the image at the left, we're looking at the back of the canvas in ordinary light, just ambient light, and the image at the right is the same area photographed from the front of the painting in transmitted light. So again, we're looking at the light passing through the painting, and you can see, it's a bit small on the screen here, but you actually see the weave of the canvas. There's that little paint on the support, on the ground. And this bit running through this horizontal white line here appears to be an area where in the weaving of the fabric, a thread like misfired or is missing in that one area. So we're looking at an area where there's not a thread. The white bit here is actually the ground of the painting. You're actually seeing the ground like unsupported by any fabric. Again, detail on the right in transmitted light, and the detail on the left is that same area in ordinary light. And what we're looking at here is the window. This is what I want to show you. He planned this painting meticulously. His drawing, the underdrawing that he did in the carbon-based medium, planned for reserves, which he was going to use intentionally as part of his palette in the painting. So the window panes in the window, those are reserves. We're looking at the actual ground there. And this is a closer look at that, and another area of windows where you're looking at the window panes, and that's just exposed ground. He did edit a little bit along the way, and you can see these two diagonal lines running under the paint for the structure that's there. What's interesting here, first of all, that he did edit a little bit, but also that he chose to leave them exposed. You see them; they're parts of the image. For whatever reason you chose to do that, it's really wonderful. He didn't feel like he had to cover up every little thing. He wanted them to play a part in the composition. And that's something you see in other works of his also. It's not just this painting. And here's another detail in another area of the painting. So throughout the painting process, I mentioned that he was reinforcing those that blue linear underpainting that he had done. And if you look at the image on the left, where I've annotated with the yellow lines, and I'll take them away, those areas are darker. So as he's painted, and the original lines he added were the brighter blue that you see there. And then as time went on and he was refining, he reinforced them with darker lines, and you can see them there again. And in the detail on the right, the box at the top, that's showing the red paint, which is directly on top of the bright blue. And the box on the bottom is where that darker blue is then brought over the red, so you can start to see how he layered his paint. This is again just stepping back, so you can see the blue linear underpainting. And finally, this is an image in specular light, and specular light is when a painting is lit with a strongly facing light, and its purpose is to show the surface gloss. So what we're looking at here are areas of a matte paint and glossy paint. The arrow at the top is pointing to an area of gloss, and the bottom is pointing to an area of matte paint. He intentionally did not varnish this painting. He strove for this exact surface. He wanted you to see this play of matte and gloss. It's a really active and playful and vibrant surface, and it's something that if you were standing right in front of a painting, you wouldn't know it. You would just know that it was a bit matte. But as you walk around the painting, your eye would catch it, and you would feel it. You wouldn't. It's not something you would sit and look at. You would know it. It's really beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
No, I just love how when you describe that layer by layer, and you can just imagine the artist working, at all those different layers. It really brings it alive. Can you talk a bit about the condition of the painting?
I sure can. I'm going to say first, everything that I say in the context of its condition, or about its condition, is in the context of it being in beautiful condition. All these things we're going to talk about are relatively minor in the grand scheme of things. So again, it's in just remarkable condition. So just always have that in the back of your mind. Anytime you talk about condition, if you really drill down and focus on it so much, things start to sound bad when you see images of losses and things. But again, like every one of these things is very minor. The image we see here at the left, I've highlighted an area which is a split in the stretcher. The stretcher actually has a number of splits in it. They do not affect the structural integrity at all of the stretcher. It's perfectly stable, but they do exist. So in the course of the treatment, we're going to stabilize them just as a preventive measure to ensure that it never becomes a problem. This is an area on the inside. What you're seeing here is a knot in the wood of the crossbar of the stretcher, which is sprung so it's standing proud of the crossbar. And this is significant because if over time the fabric, which has a bit of slack in it, comes back against the crossbar, that knot could over time abrade the canvas. There's no trace of that having happened. It's in a perfect state, but just as a preventive measure, we would remove that knot that sprung forward, just so that it never becomes a problem. There are two small canvas patches at the back, which I've highlighted here, and they are supporting two tiny tears, one of which is about 2.5 centimeters long, and one is about 1.5 centimeters. Again, tiny little things, perfectly stable. I'm not going to change anything about the patches. It's perfect the way it is, but just to say that they exist. Oh, I will also say that the losses that you see there, likely the restorer just mended the tears and let it ride. He didn't do anything more to them. He didn't fill and retouch them because they're so small. When you're 8 inches away from the painting, you don't see them. So he left them as is. And this is a detail from the back, clearly. And what we're looking at here is the canvas as it's resting against the crossbar, which it can do in certain positions. And that's one of the main things that we'll be looking at addressing. Ideally, a canvas in a painting wouldn't be able to rest against the crossbars. So we'll be looking at how to adjust the tension so that that isn't something that happens. Okay, and finally, there are a handful of losses peppered throughout the surface and little bits of lifting paint. Again, we're looking at them on the screen here, greatly magnified. Each one is just millimeters across, and you can see with the scale bar that's down there. Each image there, that represents about a centimeter across. So each one of those little losses is, 3, 4, 5 millimeters at most. Very minor things, but we end up consolidating the lifting, and then for the losses that are distracting, some of them, if you have a bright white loss in a field of dark paint, it's going to stand out and be a bit distracting. So those specific losses we would fill and retouch. But if they're not distracting, we would just leave it.
So could I ask, you pointed out those 2 patches on the back, but how unusual is it for a painting by Schiele to have undergone so little treatment?
It's rare that one of Schiele's canvas paintings should find its way to us in such really a wholesome state, having required so little treatment. And I will add that it's not by accident that happened. Clearly, everyone who had a hand in ushering it along through the years did so tenderly and with great care.
Nice. So one more question. Is there anything that we can learn that we may not have been able to learn from this painting had it been treated more over the years? And, would that depend on the methods being used?
That's an interesting way to put that question. Yes, it would certainly depend on the methods and the materials. I should say that right now we have all of Schiele's original surfaces. Had we examined this a week ago or 50 years ago, our examination would yield most of the same results. The main difference, of course, is aging that just occurs over time. But it is, for the most part, as it was. There are a couple treatments that have been done to to canvas paintings by Schiele that at times have compromised these surfaces. For instance, lining and varnishing. Lining is not always a bad thing. Sometimes it's necessary, and when done well, it's a brilliant thing. And for a painting that is made in a way that it requires a varnish, to varnish something can be a brilliant thing also. So these aren't, I don't mean to say anything bad about lining and about varnishing, but speaking specifically of this painting, the techniques of the past, going back 40, 50, 60, 100 years ago, some of the techniques that could have been used would have certainly compromised these surfaces. So lining, a primary issue there is the adhesive that's used. Some of these adhesives, they would soak right into the fabric of the original support, and then because this ground is just so thin, it would saturate the ground. It would absorb right into the ground. So that ground would it would look like it would go a little transparent because the canvas behind it would be darker, so you'd be seeing more of the canvas behind it. And then the adhesive itself is not a clear, bright material. It's for instance, one of these would be a wax resin adhesive, which has a really a rather dark color to it. And over time, it gets darker. So then you'd have this material saturating the canvas, the original canvas, and the ground. So effectively, you turn this pristine white ground, which occupies a significant part of this painting, you'd be taking that and dropping the color, making it, towards, brown, a much darker color. And because the paint film was so thin, this would affect the entire painting. It would crush the tonal relationships of the painting.
So, Sean, if I could just interrupt, I've been told we only have a few more minutes.
Okay.
And Ellen, I haven't had a chance to ask you a question yet, but you're sort of introducing the topic of the history of paintings conservation. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Sure, absolutely, yeah. So I think we were thinking about talking about how conservation treatments have developed over the years. And I just want to emphasize what Sean was saying about how beautiful the condition of this painting is. I'm also learning about this painting for the first time right now, and just the tonal relationships, the mattness of the surface, having that be retained is really incredible, because a lot of past conservation treatments would have really affected that. So I think conservation treatments have shifted over time with shifts in technology and availability of materials. So people have been taking care of paintings for as long as paintings have existed. So say in the Renaissance, cleaning technology would have been water or strong acids or strong bases, and that of course can affect a paint layer. And moving forward, solvents came into play and varnish removals. So those can be done very sensitively, solvent cleanings, or they can be done quite interventively. But today we have a whole world of materials available to us, solvents of all sorts, the ability to very carefully tailor aqueous solutions to the needs of the painting surface, and especially in instances like this Schiele painting with a very matte, absorbent, delicate surface, the ability to tailor the cleaning solutions and to tailor the application method is really, that's a very big development in the last number of years. Lining, of course, that has changed a lot over the years, depending on the regions in which these systems were developed, and I think there's been a shift from kind of overall treatment, like wax resin lining, that kind of functions to consolidate flaking paint and flatten the painting and add a supportive fabric to an artwork all at once. But today there are other methods where you can separate all of these things out and do them individually and sensitively to the needs of the painting. So I know we're running out of time. I can delve into some things a little bit more.
But so in a way, the two patches that were applied, that was kind of a sensitive
that was very sensitive, especially, patches are not uncommon, but I think what's especially sensitive is that there was no retouching added. Normally, I think somebody would have done that, and maybe in a way that wouldn't have necessarily been reversible, and the concept of reversibility is also kind of a newer development in conservation. So the idea that you're not going to, say, retouch an oil painting with oil paint because chemically they're very similar and very difficult to separate from each other in the future, when somebody might want to retreat, or the retouching kind of the color shifts. So there are new materials that we have now that are quite different from oil paints, so you can remove those, you can identify them as a separate material and not of that artist.
Cool. Well, I think we are running out of time. So I'll conclude this session, and I just want to thank the TEFAF Art Restoration Fund, not only for providing the funding for this important conservation treatment, but also giving us the opportunity to bring this kind of work to light. Conservation is always in need of funds. So thank you very much to TEFAF, and thank you also to all the panelists.